So in today's Regenerative Finance Lab, we're going to talk about two really important frameworks or ways of thinking that each in its own right deserves its own webinar. And one of them we actually explored a little bit 2 weeks ago. And so we're going to talk about bioregional weaving and what that is and how it works. And we're going to talk about flow funding. And then we're going to talk about how I have been a guinea pig, or maybe you should say I've been having other people be guinea pigs of doing bioregional weaving and flow funding and learning a lot about how powerful it is. And so we're going to be exploring that today. And I guess the thing I want to say first is that I see this as a way of living an entirely new economic paradigm into being. I feel like this is beyond socialism. This is beyond capitalism. This is beyond so many of the things that came before, because it's a truly living systems lens. It's truly living systems, which means that some of the primary energy you work with is the passion and the personal life purpose of individual people, and you enliven the contexts, and then you co-create together in ways that are not reducible to what came before or to what's present at the moment. And so this is a really, really powerful way of transforming your local community and transforming the people around you. So that's all I'll say. That I'm going to give the presentation. The presentation is relatively short, which means we'll have lots of time for discussion. So I want the presentation to just lay out the basic ideas and give an example of how it can be applied, and then show how a couple of the places we are applying it in both Bodichara and in the design school. And then I want us to have conversations. So the presentation will probably be something like 15 or 20 minutes, and then we'll have lots of time for discussion afterwards. So let's do this, shall we? Here we go. Okay. Zoom adds even more popped up windows I have to get out of the way to start. Okay, so today we're talking about the role of bioregional weaving in flow funding, which means we need to briefly define what those things are. And I'm going to use slides I've used before for part of this presentation. So first of all, what is flow funding? This is your reminder if you were with us 2 weeks ago. Flow funding is a special kind of philanthropy where money flows into the hands of local people. Those local people are then empowered to distribute the money to others. So you create financial flow through relationships of trust. And so once someone has been chosen to be a flow funder, they basically are given money and they're empowered to disperse that money any way they see fit. They know what is needed locally. They know who is trustworthy. They know who's doing the good work. And the money that comes in arrives like a gift. The flow funder receives the gift of being able to gift to others, and then the others receive the gift of being able to live out their life purpose in the community, and it moves to where the needs and the opportunities arise moment to moment in the real world context. It's very important to say this is the exact opposite of applying for a grant. It's not like you know that some foundation has money and you beg alongside 100 other applicants to maybe be funded, and they have this black box that rejects you or approves you and you don't really know why. And then you're accountable to the funder to do their reporting requirements. You get rid of all of those things. Flow funding is, I have been empowered to bring funding as a flow funder to people in my community who are doing good work, to help them do more good work, and they don't even necessarily know I have money. So I show up in the context to offer ways of supporting in a completely trust-based fashion that's very highly relational. So this is the example I gave 2 weeks ago. If I am the flow funder, that means money flows to me, and I am the expert in the local. I know what's going on here. I know who the trustworthy people are. I know who's doing good work. I have insights into what's needed. And I apply that knowledge to identify flow fund recipients, people who can receive the money. They usually don't know I have money. It's not like they're looking to me as like, Joe has money, let me go and schmooze up to him. They may not even know I have money. And then we structure some kind of an agreement. Hey, look, I can give you $2,000 to do this thing because this would be really valuable. Or I see you're doing this and you just told me what you really want to do. Here's $2,000 to support you. So you basically structure an agreement with the flow fund recipient. And this is where you clarify the purpose and the needs associated with the reciprocity agreements of this context, and then you flow money to them. And they don't necessarily have to report anything. You usually just ask them to tell stories about it. So you just watch them go and do awesome things in the community. And then as the flow funder, this is me in this case, I would weave the larger context that my flow fund recipient's working in. And that's where the bioregional weaver comes in, because I, as a flow funder, can move resources into the community. But if I'm also a bioregional weaver, then I can flow funding to people that weaves the bioregional frameworks, that weaves the regeneration of my bioregion, and I can support the flow fund recipient by continuing to weave my bioregion. And that's the magical other half of the conversation today. So this is a review from the webinar last week, that the way that you go about practicing bioregional organizing is you stand in the world with a bioregional mind, which is also what a bioregional weaver is able to do, because you stand in the world with this bioregional way of seeing the world, and you see all these fragmented regenerative projects and people, and you see the potential to weave them. So if you come in as a flow funder with this bioregional mind, you can flow funding into the weave by funding people and projects that enable the weaving to continue, or that strengthen the weaving that is happening. And then all of these participants become a weave together. They become a collective, they become a collaborative framework. And if you're doing a good job at this, it's because you're grounded in discernment of reality. You're actually weaving with what is really happening, with what the real needs are, with the real challenges of the community, and with the real power and role that you have as a bioregional weaver. So, what is this bioregional weaver? Like, what does that really mean? Well, a bioregional weaver, as the name suggests, is someone who creates social connections and new capacities, so they engage in weaving within their community, but they do it through bioregional frameworks and at the bioregional scale. So I truly am, like literally, Joe Brewer is a bioregional weaver. I am a bioregional weaver in Barichara, Colombia. So what are some of the things I'm doing as a bioregional weaver? Well, one is I identify regenerative projects and I start to weave them into tapestries. I bring regenerative projects that are isolated from each other into frameworks of collaboration or in tapestries of shared purpose and shared outcome. The projects don't need to work together, but they need to have complementary capacities to serve larger systemic goals. Also, I can do the work of creating a bioregional learning ecosystem. I can identify all the ways that we learn about and live out our story of place and help to weave and connect those into learning ecosystems. And this is how you create a bioregional learning center as a bioregional weaver. So I can identify fragmented efforts and weave them into frameworks of collective outcome. And I can build ecosystems of learning and knowledge commons and identify weaknesses in the learning ecosystem and bring resources to strengthening the ecosystem as a whole to become an ecosystem architect. An architect of learning ecosystems is a role that a bioregional weaver might play. I also can help support the creation of territorial governance. Like here in Barichara, we created a territorial foundation, Barichara Regenerativa, and one of the things that Barichara Regenerativa does is it convenes stakeholder groups that share geography and thematic area. So they might share a watershed and a focus on watershed restoration. And then we create frameworks of territorial governance by facilitating and convening landscape partnerships and integrated landscape management frameworks and shared agendas and collaborative budgets and all kinds of things. The bioregional weaver works to build territorial governance with other stakeholders in the community. See how this is really powerful stuff. The bioregional weaver creates a bioregional funding ecosystem, which can include flow funding, but it can include all other kinds of funding as well. So the bioregional weaver is seeing how do resources move in our bioregion, and how can we make them more systematic, to make them more systemic, to increase their capacities, to strengthen their flows, to identify resources we already have and depend less on the outside world, and all kinds of things. There's a huge body of work that bioregional weavers do. in creating learning ecosystems, territorial governance, and funding ecosystems. And bioregional weavers design pro-social contexts. What I mean is we help create functioning groups, and we work with really critical groups to help them function better. So we might find someone who does conflict resolution or conflict transformation and bring them into a local regenerative process to help establish a pro-social context so that group functions better. So the bioregional weaver is looking at the health and well-being of regenerative processes, of individuals, and the functioning of healthy groups. See, the bioregional weaver is doing all kinds of stuff. And of course, the bioregional weaver is place-based because they're bioregional and they actually are in the community. You can't be an external consultant doing bioregional weaving. I have people come to Barichara for 2 months and they really struggle. April is here on the call with us today. April can tell you, you arrive and you discover there's all this complexity and it takes time to become part of the weaving process. So the bioregional weavers are the people who are deeply rooted in the place and are connected into, they're part of the web. Now, that doesn't mean outside support can't help. It definitely can, and it does. But the role of the bioregional weaver is inside of the bioregional process. They're weaving from within the bioregion itself. And then, of course, they have an ecological worldview, right? They have this worldview that sees the world through living systems lenses. So these are a lot of things. There are more. I could even make this more complex, but you can see being a bioregional weaver is an incredibly powerful and incredibly important thing. So what happens is that the bioregional weaver is able to weave holistic landscapes as living systems. And this creates entirely new capacities in the community where the bioregional work is taking place. So if we combine bioregional weaving with flow funding, something incredible happens. So flow funding has various attributes. It's trust-based, it's embedded in the community. You know, the flow funder is in the community, the flow fund recipients are in the community. There's local expertise and local knowledge, local context matters a great deal. There's this grassroots or community philanthropy, mobilizing resources and empowering people to share resources locally in different ways. And then when you bring that flow funding approach together with bioregional weaving, you add this ecological worldview, this integrated landscape approach, this way of weaving the entire system. A flow funder may not be weaving the system. There are different ways to be flow funders. The bioregional weaver is a systems entrepreneur. They are experimenting with, improving, and creating new systems all the time. And the bioregional weaver is using bioregional frameworks. And when you put them together, when you put the flow fund model together with the bioregional weaver, it creates a pattern of cultural design where you can actually design changes through systems entrepreneurship, weaving the system, integrated landscape approaches, bioregional frameworks. You can actually design regenerative economies at the territorial scale through trust-based approaches that are embedded in the community and that flow financial resources based on local expertise. And then you undo the neo-colonial and the capitalistic and the international development frameworks of economic development. So this creates a way to build regenerative economies at scale, which is pretty amazing. So let's look at how this works in practice with a couple of structures. And this is some work that we're doing in Barichara. So what happens if the bioregional weaver designs a funding pool for bioregional regeneration, which is that they mobilize diverse resources into a pool of funds that have some community purpose. So there might be a community fund for education, which is what I'm going to talk about in a moment. But there could be a community fund for, healing the relationships between women and the land, or for healthy and productive food systems. You could create a community fund for all kinds of community needs. But let's say that we're looking at regenerative education. We want to pool financial resources into a community funding pool for regenerative education. So what happens when we fund in this way is that the bioregional weaver can actually set up this funding pool. So the bioregional weaver holds the whole system in their mind. They're really looking at the whole system approach, but they're cultivating trust and they're empowering people in their local context by doing flow funding from the funding pool. So if the bioregional weaver has a funding pool, then the flow funder, who's the bioregional weaver, receives the money from the funding pool to pass to the flow fund recipients. There are lots of governing models to do this. I'm going to leave those generic for now. So in the discussion, we can talk about different ways of doing this. But just imagine that somehow the bioregion has pooled some money, and there are one or more bioregional weavers who can flow that funding into the community through a flow fund model. That's the power of having a funding pool. And so here's an example that I've been developing in Barichara throughout the last 4 years, and really strongly and explicitly in the last year, the Barichara Regenerative Education Fund. Now, I've got a funding pool, which is people give money into the Barichara Regenerative Education Fund. But where do they give the money to? I have a big portfolio of projects. So we might flow funding to Don Jesus, who plants trees and does work at Bioparque Moncora. We might flow funding to the teachers at Sueños del Bosque. We might flow funding to Jessica, who leads education programs and does reforestation work at Origen del Agua. We might flow funding into Historias Regenerativas, which is this project of telling stories in the territory that we've been doing for about a month now. We might flow funding into Tierra Sagrada to be able to buy land and bring it into the commons. So the idea here is that as a bioregional weaver, I have been weaving a lot of regenerative education work of diverse forms. And when I receive money through the invitation to donate to the Barichara Education Fund, I am trusted as a flow funder to make decisions about how the money moves into this portfolio of projects. And so I have different ways I can do it. I could convene all of the stakeholders of these different projects. We could create a collective agenda and a shared budget and then raise money together. Or it could be that someone gave me $1,000 as a donation, and I, with personal knowledge of what's going on, realize I should fund someone in the team of Historias Regenerativas right now, because that's the critical need. And I'm trusted by the donor to flow the funding in this way. So you see, this way of having a community funding pool, which is what the education fund is, and having a bioregional weaver, in this case me, enables us to have a structure for financial flow to come into the community. And so what does this do? This allows the bioregional weaver to weave a vision for bioregional regeneration. I have a vision of a bioregional learning ecosystem that Bioparque Moncora doesn't have, that Sueños del Bosque so far doesn't have, that SUNA, which is a program for learning exchanges from outsiders, they have a vision for the bioregion, but they don't have the big vision that includes all the other parts. And so the bioregional weaver holds this big vision and weaves it through the different projects that are in the fund. And when we create a funding pool for this tapestry of projects, we can create synergies between them. So we hold the integrity at the level of the bioregional vision, and then we look for the potentials and we guide the synergies to come together within and between this portfolio of regenerative projects. And this is the power of the flow funder if they're also a bioregional weaver, is that this is possible to do. A flow funder who's not a bioregional weaver just flows funding to good community leaders, but doesn't have this systemic agenda of bioregional regeneration. The bioregional weaver has the systemic agenda, but may not be flowing funds. And so we need to put the two together. And so that's what we've been doing with the Barichara Regenerative Education Fund. You could actually click on this QR code and go and donate money to it now, and join a donor support network that's pooling money into the learning resources of our education fund. So that's something we are literally doing right now, and I encourage you or anyone to donate if they want to. But we're also doing this in the design school at a larger scale. We've introduced the Bioregional Activation Funding Pool, and we've started to flow financial resources into the Barichara immersion. We've flowed funding to the River Thames for an immersion they have starting this weekend. We're flowing funding into Tarn-et-Garonne in France for a design immersion they're doing later this month. And so here what we've done is through the design school and through the membership dues of the design school, we've created a funding pool. We pool funding from the membership dues and from donations to the Earth Regeneration Fund. And then we're providing seed funding for bioregional organizers in the design school who are hosting design immersions. And that is already starting to happen now. This is a bioregional weaving flow fund at the design school level, not at the body char level. And then when we get to the Earth Regeneration Fund, then we can bring flow funding to bioregional weavers by helping bioregional weavers to set up their own flow funds. And that's a partnership we have with Kinship Earth to develop their Kinship Earth is developing tools and guidebooks for how to set up flow funds. And the design school is setting up a flow fund funding pool so that we can actually provide seed funding and guidance for how to set up a flow fund at the bioregional scale. And so people could donate to the Earth Regeneration Fund by following this QR code, and the money would go into the bioregional activation funding pool. And so the important point here is that bioregional weaving is a super powerful framework. Flow funding is an awesome and proven framework for flowing resources into community, but the magic happens when you put them together. And we are doing this in Body Chara. We're doing this in the learning journey, in the bioregional activation funding pool, and we're doing it for the planetary network of bioregions as well through the Earth Regeneration Fund. And so that's what I wanted to share with you, to give you more of a sense of how powerful this is and how it works. And we can talk more about concrete examples and all of that. But what I'd love to do now is to open it up for questions, and then we can have a discussion because we've got lots of time today. So are there any questions or comments that people have about the presentation or any of the ideas that have been shared so far? And while we're waiting, if there isn't one, I would like to ask Penny, and just put Penny on the spot. Penny, would you share a little bit of your experience of watching me as a flow funder in Body Chara? Just anything that you might like to share about that experience.
I would say it's like the combination. It's a little like magic. It's a little like it's like watching magic unfold because you can see the Joe, can you mute on your side for a sec? Yeah. I don't even know how to put this in words. It's like because the energy is alive in the moment and the weaving is taking place like in real time. And that only happens because we can see the weave taking place and how it's forming in real time. So it feels like magic because the manifestation happens with the energy in the moment, and because we have the connections in mind or in our, it's like we know the connections already across the bioregion, and then we could feel when the potential is there to flow funds into a particular place or a particular person to catalyze more energy. So that's how it's like a feeling. I'm not sure how to explain it, but it's like you can feel when something's alive and you can feel when it's sort of dead. And if you put the energy right when there's a potential, put the energy, meaning the resources, the funding, right when there's the potential, then you can feel it expand. That's what I would say, Joe.
Yeah. I think that's a beautiful, beautiful addition. So thank you, Penny. Lots of hands up. So I'll just pass it right over to Steve. Right over to you, Steve.
Yeah, thanks. So it's a powerful story, but short of cloning you and Penny and adding in some pixie dust, could you maybe give us some hope that this is replicable by us normal humans?
Well, I'll say this, that the work of doing this is the ability to connect at the heart level. You could say at the soul level, if you were comfortable with that language, of the other person and of the context. I just give an example from today because I actually set up a flow fund relationship with someone this morning. There's a person who was a teacher at Sueños del Bosque, who is an amazing teacher. This person's wonderful. And this person was feeling really constrained by some rigid application of the methodology of the the pedagogy in the school and was not very good at doing the evaluation and the reporting to the evaluator of the teachers and to communicating with the parents. None of the parents had any problem with this, but the pedagogical lead didn't like this and actually sort of pushed the teacher out of the school. And the teacher was so burned out and worn down that the teacher wanted to leave anyway. So I started a conversation with this person, realizing this is like a golden egg, like an asset, a true gift. This human being is so wonderful. Everyone loves this person. How can this person be liberated to act in service to the community? Well, I need to come to this person and say, when you leave your official job, you don't have to leave Barichara because there might be funding to support you to do other work. But we need to talk about what is your real passion? What do you care about doing? And then from that place, I, as the one making sense of the context, could see this person said things like, I want to keep teaching the way I did before, but I don't want that administrative burden. And I want to do more work in the community. I want to work more with the community and not just with the kids in the school. I'm like, well, that's actually something I know from a strategic level, we have to go there. I could actually mobilize some resources to help this person achieve that strategic focus. And then yesterday we had a moment where another person who's actually here as a world school family, their daughter is in the school as a world school. So they're paying more than the local families and they're in the world school network, just this nomadic families who put their kids in local schools for a short period of time, was observing that we're not doing world school very well because Swanjastobowski is a baby, it's a new school. So we talked about creating a world school program with this parent who practices world school and with this teacher who's no longer contracted at the school. And within the span of 24 hours, it all came together that I could sit down with this recently retired or fired teacher to become the director of a program, to design a prototype of a world school program and launch it in about a month. And so that we could basically move right into the place where this individual person's passion is, where there's strategic need, and where there's strategic opportunity, because a business model for world school is pretty easy to make financially viable. We pay a teacher at a good salary is about $1,000 a month, but you can comfortably charge $500 per child for a world school experience of 2 or 3 weeks. And that's a very reasonable in the global market. So you're talking about finding, 2 kids to enroll to cover the cost of the teacher. So like, oh, you can make this financially viable really easily. So and by the way, there's no world school offering that's visibly being shared for all of Colombia. So we would be the first. And we're Barichara, which everyone wants to visit. We're like, slam dunk, let's do this. And so it was like that kind of sense making, which is like strategic management and strategic foresight kinds of thinking. So a person can learn to do this, or maybe already knows how to do this, and almost up to the point of doing it. But I also think some of this can be taught. Maybe not all of it, but some of it.
Yeah, quick follow-up. I know others have their hand up, so I'll just keep it brief. But yeah, I can certainly see where adopting a mindset of sensing and responding and adapting as opposed to imposing a solution coming in can be really an effective intervention approach. I can see where really feeling in and connecting from heart and soul, which is kind of saying the same thing, can be effective. But there's a gap between that and what you said earlier with the bioregional weaver, all the different hats the bioregional weaver is wearing, all the different skills of weaving the tapestry of regenerative projects and building a bioregional learning ecosystem, establishing territorial governance, getting the bioregional funding ecosystem in place, intervening with pro-social guidance where groups need it, that's a lot, right? And so I do sense there are ways to make incremental progress towards that maybe all of those skills don't need to be embodied in one person. So it's not one bioregional weaver, maybe it's a group, but that's what, I think it would be helpful to hear a little bit more elaboration of incremental steps or alternate ways of sort of developing those capacities. There's no doubt that the weave of those capacities is extraordinarily powerful. But how do we get to there in incremental steps?
Yeah, I'll just say one thing that the bioregional weaver needs to find other bioregional weavers and then design pro-social contexts so the bioregional weavers can work together. My best example in Barichara is Natalia Ortiz and me. and guiding the creation of our territorial foundation with 10 co-founders. That she and I work very complementary, and we're both systemic weavers. And so that's an example where it wasn't only the two of us, but the two of us were the prime driver of that process. And every time it was faltering, it was the two of us who carried it through the hard times. And so there's something about systemic architect, systemic weaver archetypes, types of people coming together into a pair and then building pro-social context to say, oh, well, I don't do that admin reporting thing well, but I know what its capacities are that I need. I know how to find a skilled person. I know how to hire them. And so you end up with this sort of designing of pro-social contexts as a sort of an executive level leadership skill in a corporate setting, but that kind of skill adapted to the community. So I want to pass it on to others too, because Steve would just go on and on. Oh my God, your questions are so good. To be continued. And then Hunter, over to you.
Hey, thanks, Joe. And thanks, Steve, for those questions. They kind of were part of what was burning for me. And I'm kind of hoping you can right. Social media and engagements online. Sometimes I feel like I get everyone's highlight reel, and sometimes I don't get the like, let me tell you about failure. And so I want to, and we can do this like outside this conversation too, because we need to reconnect again to chat about all of this. Um, Having done some of this work myself in my local community, a lot of what comes up for me when I think of this and like the challenges of doing it are the absolute failures, or what I would like to say is like really good learning experiences. But I also need to step back from that sometimes and view that on me and be like, oh, I'm learning, but also like here are the things that I had to learn. I'm going to call it a failure to emphasize to myself the need to learn and to develop greater capacities with these things. Um, and so I'm wondering if you can like make yourself human for a moment and share about one of those things that might be also like a great way to show how this was a process of learning. So it isn't just this idea that's utopian-esque because we're not getting the steps that you took. So thank you.
Yeah, I'm going to give an example of something that happened with. I went on the Gitcoin platform, which is this open source technology platform for mobilizing resources, and we came out with Body Char's work being at the top of the list, and we received $24,000 in matching funds, and $24,000 let us do some really awesome things in Body Char. But I spent more than 6 months in deep agony and frustration trying to get people to accept the money, the local people to accept the money. Like, can I bring money to you at Casa Común for what you're doing? Can I bring money to you at this? And what I found was that there was a total lack of social context for any kind of flow to occur. And so I found myself in this place of basically publicly saying we're going to do all these things, publicly being a failure at all those things not happening and sitting for an extended period of time, while I had a whole bunch of money sitting in a bank account that I just couldn't get people to take. And I was like, what the fuck is going on here? Like what the actual hell? This is so unexpected. This is so annoying. That person said they wanted to do that. Why won't they just do the thing they said they would do? And what I found was that there were at least two things going on. One was my own sense of planetary collapse and urgency. It was like, we've got to get trees planted, like our food supply could collapse. Like I was in that sort of a place, and I was pushing. And just do your study of Wu Wei or your practices in Buddhism. If you're pushing, you're not in right relationship. Like there's something wrong there. And also that people kept like getting mad at me for bringing the money and kept accusing me of doing like power plays and manipulating and exploiting people with money. I kept trying to give people money and empower them to make decisions, and they kept just painting all of their traumas onto me. And basically, for bringing money to the community, I became a punching bag by the community. So if you think bringing money to people is going to cause them to love you, capitalism don't do that to people. Instead, I still get beat up for bringing money. Still, to this day, it's been 5 years. I brought hundreds of thousands of dollars to Body Char for lots of projects, and people still like, so Joe's just bringing in money for his own kids' education, right? Or Joe's going to steal that land later, or whatever nonsense. And I'm like, did you see how openly and transparently I passed all the money to everyone else, and they set up their own governance, blah, 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 blah? It does not matter. The truth does not matter. What matters is that you have to take the time to build those trusting relationships at their appropriate scale and no bigger. And so what I started to find was my best way to build these contexts was to flow small amounts of money for a short period of time to not create codependence with people. It was usually like fund someone for 3 months with a monthly salary. And then as they go and do things, I'm weaving in the field. And my weaving is over the span of 4 or 5 years. No one understands what the hell I'm doing. I'm just going to keep doing it while they don't understand. And I'm very alone. And the more power I have to bring resources, the more people are suspicious of me in the community. And so there are all these weird paradoxes in this. And so there have been plenty of times where I just look at Penny and go like, I feel like just quitting. I want to take my ball and go home. I don't want to give that person any more money. They don't have any gratitude. They're being a jerk. Like, where's the reciprocity? And I was like, oh, wait, that was me. I needed to build that reciprocity first, or else I shouldn't have brought any money to that person. And, and things, then there's been a lot of learning in this. But, just try and give money to someone and watch them be like, and what do you really want? Are you trying to sleep with me? Do you want to buy this land? Are you doing this? Are you doing that? You're like, people, all kinds of weird shit. And you don't know what it is until their trauma response kicks in. So I would just say that this work is super messy because it's so human. It's so much in the human relationships. It's just really messy. And I've got lots of battle scars, and that's why I'm getting so good at this. It's like you do martial arts by practicing sparring, right? And you get kicked. So anyway, much more to be said another time. But it's really important to know that you practice this, and it's better to practice small because the money has power. And when there's power, people's wounds get opened up. And that's just part of it. So yeah, I don't know if that's human enough, but
Perfectly human like the rest of us. Thanks, Joe.
excellent. Yeah. I got warts. I can show that. I got one right here. Anyway, thank you, Hunter. And Claire, over to you.
Yeah, no. Well, Joe, I first of all, just wanted to start off by saying it is such a joy to hear the role of the weaver being lifted up is so important because that's what I have. It's just like, to me, I didn't know how any of this happened without the weaver and a lot of what you were describing. So that was the first thing. But I wanted to just share. I've had a series of very rich events over the last week and also. But last night I went to the launch of what's called the Salish Sea Hub. And it was like looking back over 30 something years of being here and doing this work weaving and seeing all of the touch points of this like absolutely incredible participatory research based grouping of like diverse grouping of people, including the Native Friendship Center, so that the like all these community partners, research mapping, community mapping, coming together, and sort of knowing that, like I knew I'd touched some of those. There's some influence there, but they had touched me as well, and I had grown, and they had grown, and seeing how that, and you kind of lose track of how all those pieces are coming together, so that when you start to see this like 30 something years later and all the relationships that have been developed, and then to see just, this is what we were trying to imagine for Cascadia launching as the Cascadia Hub Development Cultivator. And it's like, oh my God, here it is. But it's like, it's so incredible what the complexity they're able to hold. And I just wanted to bring in that the thing that I've noticed, so there was another group last week that I'd gone to as well, is that the people that were doing this work, like multiple partners working together around something that is land-based, is like the culture and the pro-sociality of like, it's not just, it just absolutely resonates out from all of how they're dealing. And it's actually fun to be there. It's a place that's like a basin of attraction. And yes, you come away just energized because people are living higher versions of what they could just be by themselves. So I just wanted to say there was this like feeling of that just is very different from almost any other group that you go to trying to do work. There's a sort of aliveness in this collective vision, and there's a messiness too. But anyway, I'm going to put a link in the chat to this group because I'm just like I'm still reeling from just how much has come together. And I didn't know it's taken them 7 years to pull this together. I know all of the different partners. I just didn't know they were working on this. So yeah.
Yeah, I'll just make one comment, and it's sort of like lobbing a softball at Eric to knock it over the fence, because I know Eric's going to share next. And something Eric and I have been talking about, which is the energetic level that you're talking about, that shift in energy is real. Maybe that's all I'll say for now to pass it over to Eric, but it's real. It's what you're describing. I know you know that, and I'm just naming it, is that you can work in increasing the energetic capacities of the field, and you do it through these human relationships. So that's the thing I wanted to say, and then pass it over to Eric. For some reason, I can't hear you, Eric. I don't know why. Is it something with like taking out the headphones and putting them back in or something? I know Zoom does that sometimes.
Okay, is that better?
Yeah, now I can hear you.
Okay. There was a lot of noise outside. It's Friday evening and there's partying all over the place. And so I put the headphones in for a change. Yes. Now, what you're describing is extremely powerful. I just want to confirm. And the challenge, one of the previous speakers referred to, is how do we clone and duplicate Joe and Penny? I just wanted to add to that there are methodologies or processes that you can actually teach people in the morning, maybe a day, and how to form teams, how to operate the team, so that you don't rely on an individual. You are relying on 4 or 5 people that come together and work together as a team. The change happens, or the smallest unit of change is not necessarily the individual, it's the small team. And mobilizing those teams is the key art, that, so that you're not dependent on an individual, you're dependent on a group of people. So you mobilize as many as you can afford, given the state of the availability of flow funding and so on. You mobilize as many teams as you can possibly do, and then you've got to let them go. Yes, there's weaving still to be done all the time, but people are naturally weavers if you give them the opportunity and empower them to actually do so. So that's all I want to add for tonight. Thank you.
I think it's really helpful advice. And I would say one of the things, just to, in a sense, confirm and really reinforce what you're saying, is that there's a scale at which a person can do things. And I'm unusually productive, so I'm on the higher end of productivity in that. But I can't achieve what we're doing through the Territorial Foundation now, which in one sense I find frustratingly slow, because it's a web of relationships. It took us 3 years to even agree to legally constitute and all of this. But one of the things that started to happen as that group capacity came into being is then there was the mapping of 29 social actors, 29 stakeholders in the community, all working around the theme of water, and then identifying how to support them in structuring themselves. And now, as we'd say in the Midwest, now you're cooking with gas, which is saying now you got something that really can take off. Yes. And because there you have a team that's supporting a team of teams, because there's actually multiple work groups formed.
Yes.
And
Yes.
and that actually has to be held at a group level.
Yes,
So,
and
yeah.
that process of going from individual to team and then to multiple teams and then to community of practice and all of that there's a very, very clear process of doing it. And it is infinitely scalable.
Yeah, because it's modular and fractal. Yeah.
Which is what is needed. But anyway, that's a topic that can be elaborated at another time. But there is a very clear pathway to actually doing it.
To
Thank
be
you.
continued. Thank you, Eric. And I see
Yes.
people like, I want to take a crash course on what Eric's talking about. So yes, please. And and over to Howard. Over to you.
Okay, I raised my hand to ask you about reciprocity as an element of the flow funding, and that came up a little bit in your response to to the question. But I did want to hear you expand a little bit more about integrating reciprocity into this bioregional flow funding model. And I also wanted to see what you thought about um, eco credits rather than cash to recognize the value of the work that the people are doing in regeneration, and to perhaps reciprocity flow through the community climate resilience that's being built by the work that, if they're not, I think your comments were really illuminating to me, that I didn't think it would be hard to give people money, but those reactions are expected responses given the economic and political climate in which we operate. And that's where I would think something like eco credits, without all the MRV demands, perhaps using ground truthing and other ways of authenticating somebody being genuine, to have that as the flow rather than cash, because and they don't have to be called eco credits, they could be called something culturally appropriate. And the final thing I wanted you to give me some feedback on is the idea of having the weaver by committee, using a collaborative work group, because the kind of personality that can be genuine in the setting of approaching somebody in this way and doing it one-on-one is perhaps a limited resource, at least a relatively scarce personality type. And I'm wondering if we could set up collaborative work groups and pro-social organizations that are made up of people empowered to serve as weavers, but not to personalize it in the way that the model presents. So those were the three things I was looking for you to expand on: is reciprocity, for credits as a manifestation rather than cash of the generosity, and then finally weaving by committee.
Maybe I'll start with the last one first and then sort of work in reverse, because I'd like to spend more time on the reciprocity. I think there is no such thing as a committee that can identify a bioregional weaver. The bioregional weaver usually doesn't even identify themselves as a bioregional weaver, because it's so actually, I've got the title for next week's webinar topic, and it's Exploring the Bioregional Mind. And I'm going to explore the power of being in the imaginative space, and how a bioregional weaver is in an imaginative space that usually they're ahead of others. Now, that doesn't mean that there's no one else in their bioregion, but that they're probably not going to find them for a while, that they're going to be out being in this imaginative space, feeling mostly alone for a while. Like, I'll give an example. There was this piece of land that we tried to buy. The donor ended up stealing the land. It was a terrible story. But this land, I saw this deep value of this land, and no one else did. Penny got to watch this. As like, people are like, why would you spend so much money on that land when you could just buy the land? I'm like, land is not a commodity. That specific land is configured in a relational context that is completely unique and irreplaceable in the territory. And I had a vision for that land that no one around me had. And so there was a role of being the bioregional weaver, which was to see things in a way that Like there's no committee that could see that way and then select someone. Now, that doesn't mean maybe we can't get there. And I think one of the things would be what happens with a group called the flow fund advisors in a flow funding model is you can have flow fund advisors that can identify a potential flow funder. And that I think works in the way that you're talking about, but probably not for selecting someone to be a bioregional weaver. Bioregional weavers are people who basically are, squares in a round peg world who are just moving around in a different way, usually alone and frustrated and undervalued. And then they cultivate their capacity. So that's what I think what Claire was getting at in a sense, by actually starting to name bioregional weavers as an existing thing will help people to self-identify into that role if they actually are one. And then maybe eventually it can be identified in the community. But in most places, I think that's premature. I'm not going to say that's like a definitive statement, but that's my sense. Now on to the eco credits question. I think there's something really important about creating different kinds of asset classes for representing and holding value that can be exchanged in the community. And even more than the eco credits, and I know you're familiar with this larger world, is the design of the market frameworks. So if you were to do it in a Web3 crypto context, it would be things like decentralized autonomous organizations and smart contracts and other such things, sort of in that realm of governing protocols and reporting protocols. I think there's great power in naming asset classes and representing them in a way that's parallel to the fiat currency system. I think there's great value in that. And that there are things in like the grassroots economics group in East Africa does lots of things with creating different kinds of community currencies. And there are things of that, I'd say, of that ilk that are hugely valuable, especially because they're agreements created by local people. The local people create their own market frameworks. It's anti-globalization in the most deep decolonial sense. I think it's super important.
Yeah, and I wanted to make real clear that I was
Please.
talking place-based bioregional scoped credits that the credit class would be created by the folks who would be participating in it. So it's not to have a commodity, it's really anti-commodity.
Yeah, I totally get where you're going with that. And so that takes us to reciprocity, because you have to create reciprocity for both of the other topics. Which is like the bioregional weaver needs to create reciprocity relationships in order to be a legitimate bioregional weaver, because the legitimacy is in their trust relationships in their bioregion. Do I actually represent the bioregion in a way that the community accepts and doesn't reject? And so here, I'm a good example. I'm not from Bardichara. I'm not from South America. I'm from the global north. People would call me white. I don't call me white, but I show up as this so-called white guy from the United States, and I fit all the criteria to not be a representative of the community. So my legitimacy has to be completely built in trust through real interactions on the ground. So this building up of legitimacy, of genuine legitimacy, is a reciprocity building process. So that's just a comment with much more to discuss. And then I would say in the realm of like eco credits or the design of those market dynamics, reciprocity is way out front, which is to say you need to be thinking about what kinds of reciprocity are healthy in your unique local context in order to design your eco credits, in order to design your exchange protocols, etc. And the example I'd give from our work that Penny and I are doing is we started creating this organization, Tierra Sagrada. What was the first work we did? We looked at a previous time of trying to bring land into commons, that donor who went rogue and took it away from the community. We gathered a bunch of lessons about what we did wrong, and then we focused on creating reciprocity agreements. Like, oh, we didn't create reciprocity with the donor in this way. We didn't create reciprocity around use of land in that way. We didn't create reciprocity with the other actors in the education, etc. And we did 6 months of just looking at the way we did reciprocity wrong or failed to do it right, and started to build frameworks to experiment with. Which is just to say that reciprocity work is a huge realm of the design of an economy. There's just so much there.
I just want to offer one last comment on the individualization of the weaver function and how that seems to be a limiting factor in its scalability and how you can how you can replicate the models that are being created. And I guess I would just want to think more about how to really weave trust into and through a group so that it's a representative, it's an organization that plays the role, we're talking a handful of people, not a room full of people, that would play that role in complementary ways with understanding that trust is the currency that makes it work.
I would say that the bioregional weaver is mycelial in the sense that its first replicable pattern is an individual, but then its second replicable pattern is a dyad of two people working together. But as it starts to grow out, it'll become a distributed mycelial network of functioning groups. And you need hierarchy in the sense of coordination mechanisms and so forth among that distributed network, but in a healthy way that's appropriate to the way that network needs to deploy itself. So for example, you might have a 5-year agenda that is created through a multi-stakeholder convening process, and the centralization is in the convening, the decentralization is in the knowledge creation and collective intelligence, and then the centralization is articulating a proposed structure for the agenda, and then the decentralization is going back, basically still doing like hierarchical processes are embedded there. And that's where I think the work of landscape partnerships, of large-scale infrastructure projects, there are various historic examples of how to do that well, and you start to bring that knowledge in. And so I completely agree that the individual bioregional weaver is limiting, but what's not limiting is the pattern that the bioregional weaver embodies. But you have to appropriately adapt what that means to different contexts. So like, what is a group of people that are stakeholder representatives for bioregional education? How do they function as a bioregional weaver within their domain? Obviously, at a later stage of development, you had to build up a series of governing frameworks before you got there. So I completely agree with you. And that it is a limiting concept, and that the how is more in what Eric was saying about creating those healthy, functional small groups and their relationship to how they're serving the community. And then from there, you can get to beautiful levels of organizational development.
Well, thanks for giving me this much time. And I wanted to say to Claire that I'm looking forward to continuing the conversation because she's someone who also embodies a bioregional weaver. And I'd like to explore how to run it through an organization like ours, because I don't know that we have the likes of you or Claire ready to go. So I appreciate all that insight, and I'll look forward, Claire, next weekend to pursuing the conversation.
Well, speaking of weaving, look at Howard. You're just role modeling weaving right there. Perfect. Thank you, Howard. David, over to you.
Well, this is very, very instructive, but I realize the weaving has to come before the flow, and I imagine my I fantasize myself as a weaver, but I realize that I have a lot of incompetencies that need to be complemented by others. So the idea of a committee, while it might not be totally functional, but we need to have people with different competencies that can complement each other in order to be competent. So, I mean, what I was thinking is I really need a weaving lab. I need to be able to build my own trust in my own abilities, but also to develop my abilities in order to be a weaver. So I could see that as within the design school doing something like that, but also just feeling incompetent to be able to do this, and where like, where do I start? Okay, maybe I'll develop a course, or maybe I can do a gather some people that think of themselves as weavers, or maybe build it as a weaving lab and do something like that. But these ideas are kind of swimming around without any direction. I wonder if you can clarify some stuff.
I think a good place to start is asking a really basic question. How do you help someone out? How do you help someone who's going through a hard time? You're empathetic, you're paying attention to them and their needs, you develop some understanding of what's going on with them and what's going on with them inside themselves and what's going on in their situation. And then you offer some kind of support, which is that you connect them and their situation to something that was not yet in their situation, and you bring it in. This is one of the most basic elements of being a weaver, is the ability to relate to, sense, connect, and mobilize. And so it's really helpful to start with something very basic. Because like as Eric said, people are naturally weavers, but we do not value this in a market economy of professional services that you have to make scarce to make them profitable. And so there are all kinds of weird, pathologies in our market economies that suppress our natural weaving tendencies. And just as an example, my daughter has a natural inclination when she likes something, she wants to share it with someone else. And lots of kids are like that. Like, this tastes good, try it. Kids just naturally do that unless you've done something to damage that natural tendency. And so there's a way in which we've damaged a lot of these natural tendencies. So it helps just go back to the basics. It's like, in Buddhism, and I know you know a lot about this, it's like, sweep floors carry rocks, or like peel potatoes carry rocks, sweep floors, like do really basic things to remember that the wisdom is in those basic practices, and the most complex practices are that same wisdom with refined skill. And that being a weaver really is at its most basic. How do you help someone else? And so it's like being attuned to them, having a good read on them, having a sense of what they need and what their strengths are, seeing beauty in them. Sometimes people just need someone to see beauty in them. You're like, yo, you don't suck at that. You're awesome at that. But you have to discern. You're like, you're really good at communicating. You're like, I don't feel like it. It's like, but look at how you did this and this and this. Like, oh, and so the weaver happens inside ourselves, between ourselves and our context, and between us within shared contexts. And then to get to the bioregional scale is to bring a bioregional mind to that very basic capacity. So I think it's sort of like practice that, reflecting on what because bioregioning is a systemic way of relating. And the best way to practice a systemic way of relating is in a really simple context. And then recognize that you're already good at it in many ways. And so if you're like, I don't have the competence to do this thing, you're like, well, okay, well, find someone who's good at that. Yeah. And bring them into the context. It's that sort of an insight, which makes it in a weird way super basic.
And that has a very regional.
So just recognizing that that's part of this. And then to be around weavers, to be around people who are weavers. Like Howard is like, I'm gonna hang out with Claire next week. I'm like, cool. Claire thinks better when she's in group context. I've seen that about Claire. Claire's a textile artist because she needs to physically work with things for her organizing to happen. So being a weaver sometimes means you're lost without the weave. So it's very paradoxical in some ways. But just to say, being around weavers, knowing they're weavers, which you can be around like actual textile weavers, if that helps. But yeah, anyway, to be continued. And David, I hope that bolsters your confidence a little bit. And just hang out with other weavers, of different kinds, and appreciate how you're different from them, because you're going to be weaving in your own way. And I want to pass it over to Will, but his camera's off. So Will, if you turn your camera on, I can spotlight you. Or if not, I can just unspotlight both of us. Will, are you still there? There you are. Come on in.
Yes, thank you. So I gotta admit, I raised my hand just because I wanted to show y'all where I'm at, and just outdoors, and it's beautiful again. And just the rain is so awesome. It's like very rejuvenating. Yeah. And so really, I think that's about it. I did have a question earlier, but it has been a very valuable discussion, and I don't think I have anything else to add. So thank y'all.
Well, thank you, Will. I'll just add a comment that one of the ways that Will weaves is by bringing people onto the land together. And that's real weaving. So recognize it.
Yeah. We had
Well
like
brings lots of young
300
people.
kids out here this week, like young kids. It's been great.
Yeah. So just naming it, that little drainage you were just describing is weaving people. So onward with that. And then Karen, over to you.
Yeah, wow, lots that I'm thinking through, and I was typing up my ideas, and I thought, okay, I better raise my hand. So I'm hearing a lot of gendered stuff, and the sense that many of us socialize really with people who are like us, and we kind of think of people who are not like us to they do a different kind of organizing, a different kind of work. And so I'm thinking about how, some of this struggle and weaving seems like it's like the historically uncompensated work, the stuff that we sort of expect gets done, but we don't think about how dollar bills flow through that, because it's the energy of like what keeps us, what made it possible for us to be alive right now is people gave like a mothering sort of gift to us to keep us alive and keep us connected. And so I'm just sort of thinking about the way in which some of what I'm hearing today is like I'm uncomfortable doing that because it's not something that I was socialized to be good at doing. And so some of the healing is some of our own kind of ideas about gender that we can maybe explode and grow through into different ways of thinking, and that we are not atoms. We are even the people who are good at weaving, and I'm aspiring to be someone who is good at weaving. Clearly I could not do this without my structures that are keeping me alive, that are not part of the that are not accounted for in the spreadsheet. And so I'm not sure that I'm adding anything more, but those were the things that I wanted to talk about.
Well, thank you for bringing up gender. The invisible work is like all the quote women's work that doesn't get valued in capitalist societies, and the importance of recognizing that, like I said, if you do this bioregional weaving and flow funding work, you undo capitalism. You actually go to a very deep place, and that is really obvious in the practice. It's deeply decolonizing in the practice. Like you should have seen when I was talking to the teacher this morning that I was talking with around this world school model and doing this work in the next 2 months, when she was like, wait, so this elevates my sovereignty to do what I really care about in a supportive environment. And I'm like, yeah, and when that happens, a lot of your shit, a lot of your historical pains and traumas, a lot of that stuff's going to come up. But that's why you're going to have time. We're not going to ask you to do so much work you don't have time for that. Like that's part of what we're investing in is your healing, because that's what's going to make you really good at this. And this is like the opposite. Like capitalism is like you're wasting time, you're on the clock. So it's like there's
Right.
so many ways this undoes that. And just naming how significant that is. So yes.
And like the things that I've been putting myself into the past few weeks, I've been at these like climate conferences, and boy, there are a lot of people who have lost their jobs and are lost a portion of their funding or a sense of their security related to dollars, US dollars, and that they are in this kind of raw space, but it's also fertile, an opportunity to reconnect in these different ways. And I've mentioned it elsewhere, but like one of these groups, they've lost the Wisconsin Women in Conservation lost whatever grant funding was supporting them, and at the conference 2 weeks ago they said, and today's the last day of what we're doing because we have to lay off all these fantastic people who just made this conference possible, but we're going to host some potlucks. And so I'm going to host a potluck because as I said earlier, like, being in and this ties to what Penny was talking about in the session on Tuesday about really knowing what it is that you do if you weren't getting compensated, that you do if you just get up in the morning and you want to do it. And
Yeah.
for me, it's things like throwing parties and feeding people and like, being able to do the kinds of things that I could never afford to do when I was a teacher, and I'm in this space where I lost some of these ways of being, but it opened up these other ways of being. And I'm hoping that, and so now I'm throwing parties for these events, and I connected with uh, someone who has a foundation, and she's got some money she wants to spend on conservation stuff. And so I'm like, well, why don't I just, create the conditions for people to talk to each other? And
Emily?
Background noise. I think someone just like muted all of us, including you by accident. Um, I was just commenting like potluck, and I saw it being commented on in the chat. Potluck is an indigenous technology of the Longhouse people of the Pacific Northwest. And it is actually, if you think about it, it's a flow fund. There's this accumulation of inequality and like an abundant harvest, if you will, and then a redistribution that occurs through a social mechanism, which is a potlatch.
For sure.
And so these are really powerful models that we can think with.
And I want to throw one other idea too, is like the power of prayer. I know this sounds, kind of hokey, but like I am thinking about how when people are including me in their prayers, or when I'm including them in prayers, or, coming together. It's the full moon coming up, so there's a grandmother moon ceremony coming up, and I'm thinking about like all of these women who are just like, this is what I care about. And them saying that out loud in front of other people is like, oh, that's something worth caring about, or it's something I never thought about, or it's some, it's a different kind of currency that I'm playing with.
Well, I see that Claire and Sanjay have raised their hands, so I want to pass to them in a moment. Say one thing, which is when people no longer have money, if they don't have debt, because debt is the way the robber barons do the robber part of being robber barons, is through debt. But if there's not debt, then you can actually exchange without money. And I was thinking of Hunter because he's told me that he has a spare bedroom in his house that he makes available to people who do community work without having to pay rent. So you removed money from that particular exchange. But that's because he owns his house and doesn't have debt on it. And so if you can remove the debt pressure, then you can actually do all kinds of economic exchanges without money, which brings us back to Howard's comment about eco credits. You can have various kinds of value you exchange that don't involve money. But just to say that's a whole other topic, but wanted to drop that in. Thanks, Karen, and over to you, Claire.
Yeah, I just wanted to riff off of something that Karen brought up because I do think that like creating the conditions for because you're not trying to control something, you're just trying to kind of help those connecting the dots. And I think people are really, really hungry for that sense of reconnection, like the decolonizing, like we've been so that our own like not being able to see. I think this is the thing that I respond to, and what I responded to with what Karen was bringing up was when it was a comment also that Steve had put into the chat, that people just don't even realize that they've given up their power, and it's and for me, it's like, can't you see that if you see all these things, like it's like you haven't lost your power, it's just the illusion that you've bought into. And so creating the conditions for people to sort of see themselves within a system where they actually belong. And I think it's also speaks to the erosion of our wisdom systems that used to hold us. And it's like those are the things we need to build back so that we don't lose it so easily. So anyway, I just wanted to speak to that because it feels really important, just as part of what I know that I hold and what motivates me to jump in.
Yeah, no, thank you for that. I just saw Sanjay. I don't know if did you still want to speak in Hinch, but I'll come to you in a minute.
Yeah.
But yeah, I just want to be sure. Then I'll make one quick comment, and then I'll go over to you. Which is our power is in our perception of reality, in the sense that if we don't recognize that we can see our own and experience our own power, then we've given it up, just like you said. But then our power is also based in our ability to discern reality as it is. So there's this materiality, or this you're conspiring with the universe, because the universe is the other part of that relationship. And there's real power in knowing your context. And for some reason, because I went back in this open view, I'm looking at Elias and thinking of permaculture. Like, if I have the power to put mulch next to a tree, I've just helped strengthen its conditions for flourishing. I have power to see how reality works and partner with it. And that's a really important thing. And that when we do that well, we've reclaimed our power, but we've also asserted partnership in power with. It's not power over, it's power with. That tree has the power to grow, but I have the power to put mulch there. It's like I have power with the tree's natural capacities and with the soil building capacities and so on. And that power with is where the deeper power is learning how to harmonize with that other part of the real world. So yeah, and that's where the weaving is so profound, is you're dancing with these bigger energies than yourself. And those energies do most of the work, but you can nudge and guide and shape and encourage them. And that's all helpful stuff to do. All right, Sanjay, over to you.
Yeah, very briefly. I know what triggered for me, and sorry I joined late, sort of trying to figure schedule out. But when Karen was talking about some of the struggles, I think it's also a process we all are going through in terms of unlearning, right? Hugely difficult because you get pulled back into things that keep us comfortable or is the current paradigm, right? And if you're looking towards a new paradigm, there's a whole bunch of unlearning that needs to happen to relearn to get to this new place, including the role of women. GDP never talks about the important work that women do in the world, in terms of the calculation. GDP calculation happens if more people go to prison, for example. Anyway, keeping that aside, but in terms of coming together, I was previously doing some work with the Colville tribes in Eastern Washington, and then also doing some work with the Blackfeet Nation. But time and again, I've heard them talk about food as culture, and talking about exchange. We had done this project in Denver area where I live pre-COVID. So we started this concept called communal platter to bring people together over food. So the idea was, say, Joe wants to be the host of the day. So it's like a pop-up supper club. Joe's place is the third place where the hosting happens. But we had refugees, a lot of them who have moved into Denver area, live in Aurora. So we had them, everyday people, share their cuisine. So we had a Malinese, Northern Mali cuisine, Congolese cuisine. Nobody thinks about food from these cultures. But the impressive thing about that was only about 20 people. How much about Joe can host, right?
Yeah.
So the people who were coming in were paying, and all the monies were going to the refugees, or people who have recently come in as refugees. And this was an amazing way to bring people together over food, and food being culture, So I wanted to share this because there are multiple other ways to do this. For Joe as the host, the best thing he would have got is he's been the anchor to pull people together in this example, right? There's some satisfaction and the value creation he's doing without actually transacting in terms of dollars and cents. So I just wanted to share these experiences because I think a lot of it has to do with our own undoing of the paradigm we live in currently.
Yeah, thank you for that, Sanjay. I think it's like what I love in that example is the recognition that the model recognizes that there's already value being exchanged in the community, but it can be exchanged differently.
Yeah.
And that the people actually have the power to design that exchange model, which is the money came in, but it went on to the refugee community or however, like we can design that exchange model. And like you said, it's pop-up. We didn't have to create a business and have it be successful and blah. No, it's like every third Thursday or whatever. Just to show that we, going back to Claire's comment, we actually have the power to create different exchange models. How many people know that? A lot of people don't. And so it's part of that undoing the domestication part. So yeah, so thanks for that example. I'm gonna go into, I think, like the closing mode for us, because we're getting close to our time, and say that what I think is really powerful about what we've talked about today is this blend of a couple of key ideas they're just like important ideas. It's important to know what a weaver is in the community and how that relates to being a bioregional weaver. That's something in the design school we'll explore more because that's a topic that deserves more time than we spent on it today. And then flow funding is in many ways the decolonizing of capitalism. It's not just a funding model, even though it is a funding model. It's not only that. And when you start to look deeper into the ways of relating, the ways of reclaiming power, the ways of recognizing value, the ways of creating alternative models of exchange, the ways of unlearning things, it's like, wow, we're talking about something really powerful here. And then the other thing is the practice of it. It's one thing to have a nice conversation about it, it's a whole other thing to do it. And it's not, it's a whole other thing to do it as in it's really hard. And like when David was saying, I'm not sure I'd be a good weaver, I'd have to learn. And it's like, well, actually there are things you already do that are like a weaver. Let's just go back to basics and recognize it. That's a lot of this is really simple to do. And so what I think is really important for us is the reclaiming of our sovereignty to decide how we want to be in a local economy in a way that goes deeper than buying local. Although buying local is important. I'm not negating that point. It's just going deeper and saying, we, as we were saying in the conversation with Howard about eco credits, we don't even have to use fiat currency. We don't even have to use money in some of this. And so what's interesting is how deep this way of thinking goes. And so I just feel like the more that we have these conversations, and then the more of us are practicing different parts of this, and we share with each other what we're learning. We share with each other, what did it feel like when I did it? Where did I struggle? What did I do that it turned out I learned from I shouldn't have done? And maybe I can share that with you and you'll get there a little faster. These kinds of things that we can actually take over the sovereignty of our economic development. And that actually we're taking over the sovereignty of our human development when we do that. Because we're deciding to be co-creators of our local context, which is even beyond the economy. And so this is where we're like, well, if we want that river to be healthy, guess what? We can make it healthy. We don't have to let that international mining company come in and contaminate the river with their mining rights. And, you end up with those deeper places, but you start by just how we relate to each other and how we relate to each other within our holistic understanding of home, which is the bioregion. And so yeah, this for me has just been a beautiful conversation to be able to share and to be able to talk. But also, like I said, I spent an hour right before this call setting up a flow fund relationship with someone for 2 months of work that they're going to do. And the first thing I said was, this is not a work contract and I'll not be your boss, and let me explain how. And they were like, what? I was like, oh, you should have seen like how beautiful it was when this person started talking about the sun just gives brilliant energy. The tree just gives oxygen. The bird just makes songs. I, as a human being, can express my passion. I don't need a boss. I don't need someone to pay me. But the flow funding is what opened that up. in this moment of being within a debt-based economy. The flow funding is what opened that up for this person. And that's where we're doing the decolonizing work. Money can actually be a tool of decolonization. How weird is that? Because usually it's a tool of enslavement. And so money is energy. Money is a tool. And so the unlearning and the trauma healing is a big part of this. And flow funding is a great way to practice decolonizing money. And if you do it as a bioregional weaver, all the better, because you're taking this more holistic way of thinking and systems capacities and you're bringing them into what you're doing. So that's the basic lesson that I wanted to convey today. And this is another one of those webinars, because in the Finance Lab, I like these to be public. So I will share this video in a way that we can watch it. You can share it publicly. You can share it outside of the design school. I think this is a conversation that should be happening all over the world. Now we need Spanish language subtitles for Salva to take it to Valencia, but baby steps, we'll get there. There are tools for that. But just feels so good to be able to sitting in this conversation with all of you. And for those of you who would like to flow funding into the Body Chara Fund, the Bioregional Activation Funding Pool, those links are there. You can ask me for them later. And let's do more of this. And let's make it a practice. So thank you, everyone. And onward, fellow humans. Awesome. Talk to you all soon.
Thank you.